with so many things to choose, so many things grabbing at our attention, how do we find contentment? And the answer, I think, comes down to one word: focus. If we can learn to focus, we can find contentment. You know, when I look at that iPhone, I think it's pretty cool. But you know what? I've got a cell phone. And that's pretty amazing in and of itself. I was telling my kids the other day that when I was their age, we didn't have cell phones. And they gave me this confused look. And I explained how the phones back then were actually attached to the wall. And they couldn't grasp that. What do you mean, attached to the what? How, attached to the wall? Like, well, there was this cord thing that was kind of looping it. And, you know, we didn't hit numbers to dial. We went like, and they just looked at me, why did you circle your hand? I mean, I can't believe, here I am, I'm only 33, and I feel really, really old, and I start to think about technology. And like 5 years ago, I thought I was really up with it. But I look at the iPhone and I say, man, I'd love to have that. And I say, you know what, I've got a cell phone that works pretty well. If I can focus just on the fact that I have this phone, you know, everybody who calls me gets through. You know, if you call me and don't get through, I looked at my thing, I just chose not to answer it. That's not true. Always. Sometimes I'm praying, so... But if we can learn to focus, one of the reasons the boys are dealing with so much temptation at the table is because they've lost their focus. Instead of focusing on this great apple glory that they get to eat, their focus has been drawn to the apple glorious. They've lost their focus. And here's the key to contentment. The key to contentment is focus, and it's this: focus on what you have, not on what you don't have. Focus on what you have, not on what you don't have. Let's go back to the PC versus Mac thing for a minute. And let me put a new twist on this. What if this really is the biggest choice you ever have to face in your life? What if this is actually a choice that you have to face every day? What if this isn't really talking about computers? What if what this really means is you have to choose on a daily, maybe even an hourly basis, whether you are going to focus on the provision of Christ or the forbidden fruit? What if that's really the choice that you have to make all the time, every day? Will you focus on the provision of Christ or on the forbidden fruit? And that's really the question we're going to answer this morning. How do I focus? Why should I focus? Why is this the key to contentment, to focus on the provision of Christ instead of the forbidden fruit? And of course, you're hearing the word forbidden fruit. I guess that's two words. You're hearing the words forbidden fruit, and of course, you're thinking of Adam and Eve. And so let's go to Genesis 2, and let's look at this story of Adam and Eve and see what it has to say to us regarding contentment. You know, anytime we want to study something or think about something or figure out God's view of something, you know, one of the best places to start is in Genesis 1 through 4. We have something here in the Bible that no other religion, no other philosophy, nobody else can claim to have what we have. These first 4 chapters of Genesis are like the foundation for how to understand the world. And no one else can give you this kind of a foundation as clearly, as succinctly, and as obviously as Genesis 1 through 4. Genesis 1 tells us how the world was made. Genesis 2 tells us how God intended the world to be. Genesis 3 tells us why the world isn't that way. And Genesis 4 shows us the results of our ruining God's creation. Ask somebody why the world is the way it is. What's the secret of the world? Why are things like this? And they'll hem and they'll haw and they'll give you long philosophical dissertations. And you can say, you know what, I can tell you pretty simple. 4 chapters in Genesis. Here's how the world came to be. Here's how the world was supposed to be. Here's how man ruined it. And here's the consequences of man ruining it. Genesis 1 through 4. So if we want to understand anything about life, this is the place to start. And so today, as we begin talking about contentment, we're going to spend the next 4 weeks talking about contentment. The obvious place to start is Genesis 1 through 4. And we're going to pick up the story in Genesis 2, looking at what I would call God's ideal creation. And we're going to read this story, and I want you to understand this is a description of like the ideal thing. I mean, this is how God made the world. Now, as you listen to this, I want you to just try to picture it and what an amazing place the Garden of Eden must have been. Starting in verse 8. Now the Lord God had planted a garden in the east, in Eden, and there he put the man he had formed. And the Lord God made all kinds of trees grow out of the ground, trees that were pleasing to the eye and good for food. In the middle of the garden were the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. A river watering the garden flowed from Eden. From there it was separated into 4 headwaters. The name of the first is the Pishon. It winds through the entire land of Havilah, where there is gold. The gold of that land is good. Aromatic resin and onyx are also there. The name of the second river is the Gihon. It winds through the entire land of Cush. The name of the third river is the Tigris. It runs along the east side of Ashur. And the fourth river is the Euphrates. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. And the Lord God commanded the man, "You are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. For when you eat of it, you will surely die." God created this world, and if you read through Genesis 1 and you see how God created the world, he created a good world. 6 times in Genesis 1, God says that it's a good world. And then finally he says, God looked at all that he had created and he said, it is very, very good. So God created this world good. But then he made this environment in which to put us, humanity. And he made it the ideal place for us to be. And as you think about the way God created Eden, just think of how it might be to live in a place like this. Because the first thing we see is that he created this ideal environment. It was a beautiful home. A beautiful home for Adam and Eve. He puts them in this garden, and this description of the garden is amazing. You've got rivers flowing. You've got trees growing. And what it says about the trees is they were beautiful to look at. Now, I want you to think about what this really means. We have some places here in Michigan that are absolutely beautiful. I mean, we live in one. I mean, I don't know how often you go down to the lake and appreciate the lake that we live in. It is absolutely gorgeous, especially at sunset. What an amazing place. I love to sit in the sand. We've got great sand, too. You go to some of those other lakes, and they got that kitty litter stuff. We've got beautiful sand. Just gorgeous. And and as beautiful as West Michigan is, there are other places in our nation and in our world that are just breathtaking. Now, I want you to understand, all of those places have been soiled by the effects of man's sin for thousands and thousands of years. Can you imagine what all of those places looked like right when God created them? Can you imagine the masterpiece that the earth was when God carved it out? Unbelievable. But he took all that amazing creation, that incredible beauty that he had made, and then he made another place even more beautiful. Because while all of creation was very, very good, God created this very special place in the middle of all of it that was the most beautiful of all. How ideal would it be to live in a place like that? And that's what God gave to Adam and Eve, a beautiful home. Now, that's probably very appealing to some of the women here. Some of the men are like, yeah, take it or leave it. The house is the house. It's where you watch TV. So maybe the next part will appeal more to the men, because the next thing it says is that these trees not only were beautiful to look at, they were good for food. In this ideal living place, God gave them unlimited food.